The plight of the Uyghurs is well known in today's world. The Chinese government has systematically targeted the Turkic ethnic group in an effort to erode its cultural and religious identity. The downtrodden position they find themselves in now is in stark contrast to a distant past where the Uyghurs actually established a powerful empire, one that held sway over parts of China and intimidated various Chinese emperors to make concessions. The Uyghur Khaganate lasted for just a century, but in that time they became major players in domestic Chinese affairs. They also established a dominant presence on the Silk Road trade route, benefiting hugely as intermediaries. Although they were steppe nomads in the same vein as the Gokturks, the Uyghur Khaganate would prove to be one of the most unique amongst its Turkic counterparts, differing in religion, infrastructure, and even lifestyle. First, allow me to thank Magellan TV, the sponsor of this video. It has become one of the premier documentary streaming sites, offering excellent content on a variety of subjects. My personal favorite category is, unsurprisingly, history. Magellan TV boasts an impressive collection of historical content across various regions and time periods. Their Islamic history documentaries are always increasing, which is great for me. I'm currently making my way through the series Ottomans vs Christians, The Battle for Europe, which tracks the turbulent relationship between the Ottoman Empire and the Christian powers of Europe. Across 3 episodes, the show takes the viewer on a journey across the Middle East, the Balkans, and Western Europe over 6 centuries as it tracks the Ottoman Empire in its meteoric rise, golden age, and declining status as the sick man of Europe. Magellan TV has documentaries on a variety of different subjects, not just history. They have an ever-expanding library of content, uploading new videos every single week, many being in 4K quality. You can watch all of these without any ads. Magellan TV's 3,000 plus documentaries are also available on a variety of platforms. They reached out to me and offered to give my subscribers a free 30-day trial with the link in the video description and on screen, so you can start enjoying their documentaries. Our story starts with the end of the Gokturks. They had established the first Turkic Khaganate, which had united most Turkic peoples under one banner in the mid-6th century. But an empire of this size was destined to break up. Turkic polities throughout history have favored federalized systems that give representation to as many male members of the ruling house as possible. So within a few decades, the Gokturks split into eastern and western counterparts. This did not put an end to the internal conflict, with the Tiele Confederation constantly challenging the ruling Gokturk Ashina clan. The Tiele were a group of 9 tribes, including the Uyghurs, that were in the south of the eastern Gokturk Empire, and frequently sided with the Chinese Tang dynasty to overthrow the Gokturks. Over the course of the next century, the Gokturks' fate vacillated greatly. In 630 AD, they saw their empire overran by the Tang, only to be resuscitated 50 years later. The Uyghurs, along with the other Tiele tribes, begrudgingly accepted this, biding their time until the next rebellion. That time came in 742, when the Uyghurs along with the Karluks and Basmils revolted against the Gokturks. 2 years later, the Basmils took the Gokturk capital and executed the Khagan. However, this alliance violently dismantled itself, with the Karluks and the Uyghurs joining to attack the Basmils. They annihilated the Basmils and then subsequently proceeded to turning on one another to see who would come out on top. The Uyghurs triumphed, forcing the Karluks to migrate westward into Central Asia. The Uyghurs then tracked down and beheaded the final Gokturk Khagan in 745, sending his head to the Tang Emperor, as if to announce the arrival of a new powerhouse on the Eurasian steppe. Leading the Uyghurs to victory against the Gokturks was a tribal chief from the Yaglakar clan named Kutlug, who reigned only for 3 years. His son, Bayunchur, would lead the Uyghur Empire into its golden age. He completed the construction of the capital of Urdu Balik in a departure from their nomadic roots, the city was to be built not with yurts, but with actual buildings using Sogdian and Chinese labor. Bayunchur also solidified trade routes along his portion of the Silk Road, where goods from China either had to pass through his empire or the rival Tibetan Empire in the south. Like previous Turkic empires, the Uyghur Khaganate sought to make greater inroads into China. Khagan Bayunchur's opportunity would come in the 750s. In 751, the Tang dynasty was defeated by the unlikely alliance of the Tibetans and the Abbasid Khilafah. 4 years later, the An Lushan rebellion broke out against the Chinese emperor, which brought the Tang dynasty to its knees. Born to Sogdian and Turkic parents, An Lushan was the Tang dynasty's northern general, protecting China from the likes of the nomadic horse lords from the steppe. An Lushan was assassinated 2 years after proclaiming his rebellion, but his followers continued the fight without him for 6 more years. During this period, the Tang would call upon their Uyghur ally for military aid. In 756, Bayunchur ordered his armies into northern China, retaking Tang cities and refusing to give them back until he was paid tribute in the form of a bridal exchange and silk. These circumstances also allowed the Uyghur Khagan to extend his power into Central Asia. This would put the Uyghurs into direct contact with their greatest rival, the Tibetan Empire. These two drastically different empires fought a near constant war over the Silk Road trade routes, especially the Tian Shan and Hishi corridors. By this point, the Uyghurs had taken over nearly all of what the Second Turkic Khaganate had controlled, but one Turkish tribe located in the far north of the steppe called the Yenisei Kyrgyz defied the Khagan. In 758, Bayunchur finally decided to bring them under his fold and marched north. He would go on to capture much of their lands and even executed their Khagan before returning south. Nevertheless, the stubborn Yenisei Kyrgyz would remain at large and persisted as a thorn in the side of the Uyghurs. In the following year, 759, the Tang once again called their Uyghur allies for assistance in defeating the remnants of the An Lushan rebellion. Whilst returning from this campaign, Bayunchur was said to have died during a feast, perhaps suggesting he was poisoned. No matter the circumstances behind Bayunchur's death, he was to be succeeded by his son, Bogu. His first major action saw him being approached by a leader of the An Lushan rebellion in 762, who persuaded him to attack his erstwhile ally, the Tang. Bogu nearly invaded the Tang, but switched sides after a Chinese embassy persuaded him otherwise. The new Khagan then combined his cavalry with the Tang army and put down the remainder of the An Lushan rebellion in 763. Again, the Uyghur were rewarded with loot from towns they plundered and a generous amount of silk bundles to convince their departure. Shortly after leaving China, Bogu would do something completely unexpected. He became the first ruler in history to convert himself and his state to the religion of Manichaeism. The religion is a syncretic one based upon the teachings of a 3rd century prophet named Mani. It remained somewhat small, isolated mostly to the region of Sogdia, a place that the Uyghur Empire were heavily invested in and now mostly controlled. The Sogdian influence over the Uyghur would only grow as their alphabet was most likely adopted from the Sogdian alphabet. Manichaeist temples in Sogdia that were previously looted by the Uyghur were refurbished and reopened for public use. Before Manichaeism, the Uyghurs were practitioners of Tengri shamanism and to a lesser extent Buddhism. Sogdia was located at a vital juncture on the Silk Road. The Uyghurs would receive silk from China, which they would then sell to the Sogdians, who would then move it further along west towards the Middle East and on to Europe. So it's likely that the Sogdian influence within the Khaganate was informed by political and diplomatic concerns, as well as religious conviction. Sogdia was contested by the Uyghurs and their rivals the Tibetans, so it's possible that the Khagan's religious conversion was influenced by a desire to gain greater hegemony over this vital region. Khagan Bogu also constructed a palace fortress on an island in Lake Teri Kol in 777. Taking inspiration from Tang architecture, This island palace made the Khagan appear as if he adopted a sedentary lifestyle, in a departure from his nomadic roots. The palace was later adapted into a Manichaean temple. Not everyone was happy with Bogu's conversion and settling. A rival faction emerged that sought to bring back the traditions of the steppe and remove the foreign influence brought by Bogu. Khagan Bogu had allowed a growing retinue of Sogdian courtiers into his court, and perhaps on their council, Bogu announced his plan to invade Tang China. This caused a faction to grow within his court that was antagonistic to not only his invasion plan, but the very presence of the Manichaeists. A cousin of his by the name of Tun led the revolt and succeeded in killing Khagan Bogu. Khagan Tun restored the Tengri state religion and suppressed the Manichaeists, although he could never fully complete this task. Tun also re-established friendly relations with the Tang by marrying a Chinese princess. He would die in 789, leaving the Khaganate in great turmoil for the next 6 years. 2 minor rulers followed who could hardly exert their authority. All the while, the Tibetans and the Karluks were chipping away at the Uyghurs' territorial integrity, and a Kurultai or council was called to elect a new ruler and in turn a new ruling clan. The previous Khagan's regent was chosen, becoming Kutluk II from the Adiz clan. His reign saw a resurgence of the Uyghur Empire. First, he reinstated Manichaeism as the state religion, then he subjugated the stubborn Yenisei Kyrgyz to the north. He also retook the recently captured Karluk lands and expanded south at the expense of the Tibetan Empire. Going west, he pushed to the banks of the Sir-Dirya River, sharing a border with the powerful Abbasid Khilafah. Kutluk II died in 808 after a successful 13-year reign which saw him become what was likely one of the most powerful Uyghur Khagan. His son, Bao Yi, was next in line to rule. Bao Yi is most famous for his lack of military action and his zealous Manichaean beliefs. In the first year of his reign, he campaigned against the Tibetans and acquired the valuable Liang province which connected the main northern Silk Road to China. In 816, the Tibetans would strike back like they had never done before. They marched north towards the capital of Urdu Balik. They marched until they were only 20 miles from the capital. Here they were finally repulsed and forced back. Whilst Urdu Balik had barely been saved, this daring military excursion showed the true inner weakness of the Uyghur Khaganate. Khagan Bao Yi would die in 821, accomplishing very little after the opening days of his reign. His son Chongdi would become the new Khagan. He married a Tang princess and defeated a Tibetan Karluk invasion, with the last Tibetan campaign occurring in 823. He also helped the Tang in quashing local rebellions and, like his predecessors, refused to leave towns he captured until he was bribed. Khagan Chongdi died after a short 3-year reign. With his death in 824, his brother Zhaoli would succeed him and continue ruling a stagnant Uyghur empire for another 9 years until he was assassinated in 833. He would prove to be the last half-competent ruler of the Uyghur Empire. The 830s would see a rapid decline of the Khaganate. The weakening of imperial authority was compounded by ecological disasters that spelled the end for the once mighty empire. In these years of uncertainty, a devastating plague swept the steppe, followed by a snowstorm that froze the Uyghur Empire in place. The ice would be shattered by the Siberian-dwelling Yenisei Kyrgyz, who were invited by a disgruntled Uyghur general and gladly took the opportunity to march on Urdu Balik. Here at the capital, they burned the city, killing the final Khagan in 840. The Uyghur Khaganate's end was as sudden as its rise. The Kyrgyz overtook much of their empire as the Uyghurs split off into 2 main groups, one which settled in the Hishi corridor and the other further west in the Tarim basin. This group over time would become the Uyghurs of Xinjiang that we know today. The Uyghur Khaganate didn't even last an entire century. but their uniqueness in the history of Turkish empires cannot be ignored. If the Gokturks were the epitome of Turkish steppe empires, then the Uyghurs were everything that the Gokturks were not. They walked a fine line with an alliance to China, which most other Turks saw as an enemy. They settled and created planned cities in the fields of the steppe. They welcomed and became the first state to endorse Manichaeism. They even borrowed heavily from the cultures of their Chinese and Sogdian subjects.
Thank you guys for watching, and a special thank you goes out to my Patreons for continuing to support me financially. If you want to do so, click the link in the end screen or in the description to this video, and I would appreciate it a lot. Whatever contribution you can make, that would be awesome. Until next time, peace.